Hello and welcome to Rolling with Two. I am Will, and with me as always is Sarah. And today we're doing a two-player perspective and accessibility for role-playing adventures. Sarah, tell us a little bit about the game.
All right, Role Player Adventures is a cooperative narrative campaign board game set in the world of Ulos. So Will, how do the rules change for two players?
Well, first off, there is no bot.
Aww.
So, goodbye, Nanaman.
Bye-bye.
The changes for a two-player game are a setup which is different for all player counts. So it's not a special set of rules. It's rather read what's appropriate for two players, which is this much money, this many card plays, this many bonus actions, that sort of thing. And it's all pretty much located on setup.
Yeah, it's all there, and everybody, no matter the player count, is going to have to change setup in some way. So the game scales really nicely for the number of players.
So do we have any issues for role-playing adventures?
In terms of a two-player experience, no. We have no issues whatsoever, and in fact, I think what it does very well is that it gives a great two-player experience. Not to compare it to other games, but I mean, that's kind of how you do it. Other adventure, cooperative, campaign-style games don't always have the best experience for two players. Sometimes it can be based on the number of characters, and so you have to each play two characters, which can be fine, but sometimes you're like, I want to be one character, and I want to be able to really get into being that person in this world. This game does that. Each player gets one character, and you run through it, and you really get invested in what's going on, and you feel like you're contributing and it doesn't feel watered down or anything else in any bad way.
Yeah, the way it all does that is because what happens when you're doing a skill challenge or combat is you're solving a puzzle, which is very similar to the role-playing game that this is based off of. So by having that mechanic as its core, two players is perfectly fine. You don't lose anything in terms of what you can do for going through your adventure.
Right, so I think then we should move on to accessibility, and there are a few issues here. One of them is colors. Now first, I want to say the colors of the dice are actually really nice. Like the red and the purple are really distinct from each other, and there's green and red or green and blue. So the dice themselves are really good. The familiar dice can be a little difficult because a lot of them use black as the base, so like black and purple here. It's a little hard to tell, but not like terrible. What actually has a problem is when you look at the skill check book or the combat cards. Sometimes it's really hard to see which color is what in the little outline of the die. And it's actually worse on the combat cards because it's on a black background. So at least on the skill checks, it's on a white background. But even then, the printing color choices, maybe they didn't quite come out exactly how they should have looked like. But like the green and the blue look very similar. The purple and the red look really close. So and especially on the combat cards, it can be very difficult to tell the colors from the black background. So unfortunately, that is one of the issues.
Another major issue is the sheer amount of reading that's involved in this, because again, this is a narrative game, so there is a whole lot of reading. And you're going to need to have someone with good eyesight. The dang game calls for it to be moved around, and if you don't have people that can read or even feel comfortable reading, then the solution to that is have the dedicated reader and maybe a piece that moves around to indicate who's primary, because what the game tells you is whoever is reading breaks any sort of ties when there's any disagreement amongst the party.
Yep. So that can be a challenge, but again, can be solved in that way. But then
it does a few things right.
It does a lot of good things right. And we're just going to mention a few, and one of them, for me personally, as being the sighted person in this pairing, is there's no complex battlefield to try to describe. And that can really stop us from playing a lot of the ones that are miniature based or modular board based, because it can just get really complex. That, well, for the most part, for those who don't know, Will doesn't really see the board. I describe things and he keeps it all in his head.
It's called the theater of the mind.
It's a very big theater because he keeps most of it straight, and I don't know how he does, because I'm looking at things, and as I'm looking at things, I'm forgetting them. So this has maps, but you use one map per adventure, and it's really just 4 or 5 locations, and there's one miniature in the game. That's your party miniature, and you move it from location to location just so you know where you are. And it helps you, unlock things and keep things straight. But for the most part, every single decision is made from reading. So again, it kind of goes back to you'll need a dedicated reader or a couple people who will read. But it does that part great in that it is not visually intensive in terms of how to play the game.
Now, another thing they do very well, and this is speaking from the unsighted portion of the board, is the player boards themselves. You'll have a dual-sided player board, or dual-layered, right?
Dual-layered.
Dual-layered player board,
yeah,
that you slip your particular paper into to write the various numbers that you have associated with it. But when it comes to operating the skills, the colored bars that you see on the player mat are where you put cubes. And I can always feel that. So I know how much charisma I have. I know how much dexterity I have. I know how much anything I have. I move it off to a fatigue box off to the side, and I can actually operate my player board, which is a very different thing than pretty much any other game I can think of where you have a player board.
Yep, and that usually is an extra effort I have to do, is managing his board for him. So this is a great alleviation so that I can focus on other things, whether it's what I want to do or what I need to do, or I can look through my cards or whatever. But it is a great accessibility tool. Dual layered boards in general will always be better for those with vision disabilities because they can feel it. They can learn the order of things on the board. Like he said, he knows where his wisdom track is because he knows the order of everything, in the rows. And so it can really help those people be autonomous. Plus, in general, just for those of us who are clumsy, and I knock things all over the place, it helps keep things where they're supposed to be. So
I do believe that is the initial idea of why you do that in the first place.
Right.
But it does have the added accessibility function that I pointed out, where I can operate the board now because, I can feel it. I know where it is.
Yep, and we could go on and on, but we won't. So we will wrap this up with, how do we feel this is for 2? Would you recommend it?
Absolutely. When it comes to a narrative campaign game, this is probably the best I've played at a 2-player count. I know I'm going to get through the entire campaign. There's no doubt about it. I'm going to be dedicated on this game. So yes, it's absolutely a 2-player game.
I wholeheartedly 100% agree that this is fantastic, and I'm all on board with Will. In fact, he's had to slow me down on wanting to play it every day. So I think this is going to be very enjoyable for other people playing it at a 2-player level.
Now, is it accessible?
It is accessible for the most part. Like I said, I think the color issues will be difficult for those with colorblind challenges or just low lighting in general. If your eyesight is not perfect and you're not playing in great light, I think they could have done better to double code that. If you can get through that and you have a dedicated reader, I think this is accessible. There's a lot of stuff it does well. It's just those 2 things might be barriers.
Yes, you need at least one person with good eyes and a good light for those eyes to work properly. So, aside from that, yes, this is a fairly accessible game, which is probably why we like it so much too.
Agreed.
So that will do it for us with Rolling with 2. They can reach us at any of our social medias at
Rolling with 2, that's TWO, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And of course, here on YouTube, please like and subscribe.
So that will do it. I'm Will, this is Sarah, and why would you ever be rolling with one when you can be rolling with two?